Hello guys, welcome back. So in the last episode we managed to create our groups and we managed to display the group details page. This is the index page of the group, and we managed to display the group name and the respective members in the group, right? These are the respective members in the group. So we also managed to send the message for the respective group, but we need to make that real time, right? So for that we need to change our server.js file. We need to manage socket related things, and some part of the socket looks a little confusing, but I will manage to make you comfortable. I will try my best to make you clear, right? So let's jump into that. So here before going to server.js file, I would like to go to the index.blade.php, and here for private chat we actually we imitate the user connected method every time the new user connects the socket, right? So for group chat I would like to call socket.emit, and let's make function join group. I will create it later, join group, and then we need to send the information of user, the information of group ID and user ID. Alright, so for that let's define data here. Let data equals to what we need is we need group ID. Group ID is group ID. We have defined the group ID here, right? So this would be the group ID, and then we also need user ID, right? And the user ID would be the user ID we have defined it here, right? So and then we need the room. When in order to doing the group chat we need to make a room, and we need to create a room, and we need to manage the sockets of that room for the every user, right? So for that let's define room as well. Room would be the group plus group ID. So this would be the unique room, right? For every group, for every different group we would have different group ID, then our room would be the different as well, right? So user will be able to join to the respective group only. So let's go to the server.js file, and here just like we defined socket.user connected, so we need to define here socket.onJoin group. Socket.onJoin group. We have sent we need to close this as well. Socket.onJoin group, we have sent data here, data. Now the data we need to assign socket ID to that data array, right? Socket ID would be socket.id, and now let's check if we already have a group for that name, right? So if groups data.group ID if we already have groups with that group ID, so first of all we need to define that groups array above, right? So let me define that just like the users, var groups equals to, right? So this should be array, and also we need to subscribe to the group channel, right? So I'll copy this and paste it. So subscribe to group channel, so our name of the group would be, group channel would be here, we have defined that group channel, so that should be same group channel. So far so good. So let's jump into the join group method, and so if our group already exists, then we need to identify if the user in the respective group exists or not. So we need to create another function for that. So user exist equals to check if user exists in group. So check if user already exists in the group. So we need parameter data user id, this is the first parameter, and then data group id. Again we can go to the index.php file and see what we have sent there. Look at here. So we have sent group id, we have sent user id, we have sent room as well, and the same thing we are using here. We need to check if user already exists in that particular group. So I'm going to create that function here, function check if user exists in a group. So we have user id and we have group id. So var group equals to, so what will be the group equals to groups so we just take the respective group from the group's id. Later we will console log this, and that will make us more clear, right? So I'm going to define if exist false, so exist will be false at the beginning, and let's check if groups dot length is greater than 0, and then let's use for loop here. I equals to 0, I less than or I less than group dot length I plus plus. If group I user id equals to user id, exist would be true, and if we found that exists, we can immediately break that loop, right? We don't need to run the loop all the time. so break, and finally we would return that exist variable. So what we did here is, so I'm going to explain it. So we need to find out if user already exists in the group, right? For that we took two parameters here, user ID and group ID, and then we took the first group from the groups array, because we will push every group to the groups. So we took the first from the array, and initially we initialize exist variable as false, and then if group exists, so groups.length greater than 0 means if group exists. If groups has variable, I mean if groups has data, then we use for loop here, and for every index of that loop, if the user ID equals to user ID, this user ID, then exist would be true, so otherwise that will be false, right? So we need to, let's console log everything, and then that will be more clear. So first of all, let's go to here, and I'm just going to refresh it. We see nothing changed here, so we need to rerun that server.js file. Here is our server.js file. Let's rerun it. So we subscribe to private channel, we subscribe to group channel, and then user connected 4, right? So we have nothing log from join group here. So what I'm going to do first is console.log data. So make sure our data is coming here, right? So let's rerun. Yeah, so this data, group ID equals 3, user ID 4, and room is group 3. That is coming from this this file, right? So because we have emit that join group, and we have sent data here. So let's go back to the server.js file. So what we are going to do is, if groups data.group ID already exists, if not, we need to push data to the groups, right? So else, in the else section, what I'm going to do is groups, and then the ID would be data.group ID, and then push data, right? So I have pushed this data to the groups array with their respective group ID, right? So let's check it out here. Console.log groups. So let's rerun this. Cannot read property push of undefined. So yeah, since we didn't find this key, so this is not already this group doesn't already exist. That's why we cannot push it this way. So we do it this way, right? So data. So let's rerun this, right? So this is our one of the group, and we have assigned the data here. So 3 items for the first group. And what if already exist? So let's check here. I'm going to rerun this page, reload this page. Once the page gets reloaded, so here we have found the new log here. So we need to return this again. So this is new group. This is new group for the first time, right? But when you reload this, the group already exists, right? So group already exists. So the group already exists, but we need to find out if user already exists or not. So if user not already exists in the group, then what you need to do is groups we can push our data this time because the keys already exist, so we can push it. If user do not exist, then we can push this data directly to the group, right? So and we then need to join the socket dot join. So let's join to the respective room data dot. So the socket will join to this room. The room would will be sending from here, right? So from index.php page. Here we have assigned the room, and so we need to join the respective room, and also we need that here as well, socket.join data.room, right? And now let's move above. So just like we send the private chat, now we need to check if channel equals to group channel, and then let data equals to message dot data if data dot type equals to true, just to make sure that this is a group chat, right? We have sent the respective type from here the type equals to true, right? So here we need to take the socket ID equals to, and we need a function to find out the socket ID. So I will create them later. So for now, get socket ID of user in group. For that I need to send the sender ID. We'll get sender ID from here, and we need sender ID. The sender ID means the user ID, right? And then the dot group ID. So we can find out the socket ID from get socket ID of user in group. So we can use these similar functions here. Function. So this would be user ID. The sender ID would be user ID, right? So then another parameter will be group ID. We can copy this function here. So first of all, we found out the group, and then we don't need this, and then group dot length equals to this, and if this exists, we can return data from here. Group I socket ID, right? So because we have pushed the socket ID from here earlier, so every group would have different socket ID. So this would be the socket ID, and we need to return this. We have a method to get socket from the socket ID. For that, let associate socket equals to io dot sockets dot connected, and we need to send socket ID here. You can find more details in the respective documentation of the socket.io page, right? So we take socket ID from here, and then we can find the socket of the respective socket ID. So this is simply the function. So you can check out their documentation for more details. And then socket dot broadcast dot to so we'll broadcast the message to the socket, right? So socket dot broadcast dot to group plus data dot group ID. So this is the room, right? So we have earlier defined that the room would be group plus group ID, right? So we need to give the same respective group in the server.js file. So this in this room the message will be broadcast. So for that we need to emit. So for now you can mention this way, same as this way, the channel name, but for now I am just giving the channel name as a group message, and then the data would be the data, right? So we use them here. So we need to, so when this event would broadcast, we need to send the message to the receiver, right? So for that, let's go back to the index.blade.php file, and in the bottom of the page, so last time we used this, so right, this, and I'm copying that, and here our channel name would be just group message. We have defined group message there in the server.js file, right? So and then append message to receiver. So we are done. So let's check it out in the browser. So I will log another user as well. So